Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to the last two parts in our book, The Essenes, Children of the Light, written by Stuart Wilson and Joanna Prentis. So we're going to be finishing up the book in today's video. We're reading part 17, which consists of one chapter, and part 18, which I believe is 2 or 3 very short chapters. So part 17 is titled Summation, and we start out here with an extract from a chant by Anne Hughes, inspired by the words of Saint Francis of Assisi, or just Francis of Assisi. Make me an instrument, Lord, of thy peace, as I let go, as I release. Make me an instrument, humble and free, as I awaken the living Christ in me. Chapter 47, New Light on the Essenes. The Essenes have been a mystery, an enigma, and a real understanding of them has taken a long time to emerge. This is largely due to their obsession with secrecy, but the Essenes had also become marginalized to the point where they were considered to have had very little influence on Western culture. For many people, this meant that the Essenes were simply an obscure Jewish sect of no real importance, which could safely be forgotten. However, since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Essenes started to come back into focus again. When put together with previously known texts, a picture of the Essenes began to emerge. And this picture may be summarized as placing them into 3 main categories. So first, we've got the religious group. A severe ascetic priesthood living in rigorous monastic seclusion. The aim of this priesthood was greater purity and righteousness through following Judaic law and building a new and more perfect temple. This group is represented by the community rule, the Damascus document, and the temple scroll, texts within the Dead Sea Scrolls. Number 2, the social group. An esoteric brotherhood sharing property and living in a state of communal cooperation. The aim of this brotherhood was personal and social harmony and peace through following universal law. They respected human culture and the natural world and followed a strict vegetarian diet. This group was represented by the Essene Gospel of Peace, translated by Edmund Bordeaux Zekeli. The first volume in this series was published in 1928, predating the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls by almost 2 decades. I think the Dead Sea Scrolls were originally found or discovered somewhere in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit earlier than that. Number 3, a political group. Militant political activists who lived in wilderness camps in desert areas and saw themselves as part of an army of God. Their aim was the violent overthrow of Roman rule. They had a radical and apocalyptic view of Judaic law, and their position was close to that of the Zealots. This group is represented by the War Scroll, a text within the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the writings of Robert Eisman. These 3 groups have sharp areas of incompatibility. Although the religious and political groups share an interest in Jewish texts, the orientation of the former was peaceful and the latter violent. The universal focus of the social group, embracing Greek, Persian, and Egyptian texts, as well as the Jewish law, would have been offensive to the other 2 groups. And the meat-eating habits of the religious and political groups would have offended the vegetarians of the social group. For a long while, the Essenes were perceived by many scholars to fit into the religious group, with several writers suggesting that Qumran was run on celibate lines like a medieval monastery. A number of Essene texts do seem to support this. However, this view proved untenable after the emergence of the Damascus document, with its regulations governing husbands and wives and the discovery of skeletons of women and children in the graveyard at Qumran. In the face of this contradictory evidence, many scholars are now beginning to wonder whether we have really understood the Essenes at all, and it sounds like not very much. Certainly, an excessive reliance upon the written word can be misleading when dealing with an order as obsessed with secrecy as the Essenes were. To add to the confusion, the Essene story, especially that part of it dealing with the Dead Sea Scrolls, has been adapted and reinterpreted by scholars with their own agendas, pro-rabbinic or pro-Christian. Various attempts have been made to absorb the Essenes within the greater Judaism or the greater Christianity, despite the Essenes' history of fierce independence. Into this cauldron of confusion and conflicting views, there now emerges a new perspective in the form of past life regression. The first breakthrough came with the publication of Dolores Cannon's book, Jesus and the Essenes, in 1992. This gives a detailed description of the community at Qumran, with a number of families as well as single teachers and priests. The presence of children indicates that Qumran was certainly not an austere monastery. Our own work, which forms the basis of this book, confirms that general view of Essene that was a period. Sorry, I read it wrong. Our own work, which forms the basis of this book, confirms that general view of Essene communities. Although Daniel lived in the Hebron community, life there had many parallels with life at Qumran, and he presents the picture of a diverse group of people. He mentions the austere priests, but also talks about craftsmen, lay teachers, and other men and women who were simply absorbed in family life. And he did mention that there were some people that were just there to live a quiet life, of a minimalistic, quiet life, away from the hustle and bustle of large cities. And that certainly did consist of families. The regression evidence started by Dolores Cannon and continued in our own researches indicates that the Essenes as a whole were too diverse to fit neatly into any of the three groups cited on the other page. This evidence presents a complex picture of communities and Essene families living in towns, together with the secret layer of Essene activity, which focused around the teacher of righteousness, i.e., Jeshua. There were certainly many Essenes, including Joseph of Arimathea and others in the core group, whose sole aim was to support and protect Jesus. These Essenes worked within the framework of the Essene communities, but their allegiance was to the teacher of righteousness and not to the communities or the Essene movement as a whole. But the evidence we have uncovered goes much farther than this in investigating the roots of Essene values and philosophy. It now seems clear that, for the lay Essenes at least, there was no centrally enforced dogmatic platform of Essene belief, but a framework which encouraged individual research and direct knowledge of the truth. Each one was free to choose his or her own perception of God. This freedom contrasts sharply with the rigid restrictions accepted by the priests, their minds being focused intensely upon Yahweh. The balance of a rigid priesthood and a lay element, which was open to change and transformation, is a key factor in Essenism. This balance of the static and the dynamic created the perfect climate for the birth of Christianity. An understanding of this balance solves the riddle of how an inflexible Judaic system focused upon the past and the scriptures of the past could produce a great stride forward into the future like Christianity. The lay brothers among the Essenes had so freed themselves from the heavy hand of the past that they were able to form a crucible of change in which the ideas of Jesus, their teacher of righteousness, could take root and flourish. However, the written record still presents obstacles to understanding the processes underlying these changes. There is a great gulf between the rule-bound restrictiveness of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the tolerant openness of the Nag Hammadi library, and it is difficult to see how any system could have evolved from one to the other. The work of lay Essenes like Daniel provides the missing link between these two systems of thought, casting light both on how the Essene way developed, but also on the earliest origins of Christianity. In the light of this knowledge, it is possible to see the birth of Christianity as a natural process of evolution, rather than a sudden and inexplicable leap into the unknown. The regression evidence makes it clear that the Essenes were a complex and diverse group, with some Essenes on the fringes of the movement having much in common with the Zealots. This is confirmed by the discoveries of Essene texts at the Zealot stronghold at Masada. The experiences of Sudi Benzamer, walking a more conventional Essene path, and of Daniel ben Ezra, which is who they've been speaking with this whole time, some of whose statements have Gnostic resonances, were very different and indicate the extent to which the lay brothers encompassed very disparate points of view. This diversity is also reflected in the four key areas which formed the core and foundation of the Essene system. So first one is the source and location, Egyptian and Egypt. Their key concepts were the sun and ascension. Their savior/hero would be Osiris. Then the source of Judaic, which the location was Israel. Their key concepts were light and Yahweh, and their savior/hero would be the Messiah. Then we have Zoroastrian, which was located in Persia. Their key concepts were duality of light and darkness, and their savior hero would be the three savior sons of Zarathustra. And then we have Pythagorean, which was in Greece. Their key concepts are enlightenment and self-perfection, and their savior hero is the individual initiate. Very interesting. Okay, let's finish up. The process of moving through these four systems of thought was a continual broadening, retaining the central symbol of light, but shifting gradually from the godlike savior hero towards a focus upon the individual, who is seen journeying from darkness and ignorance up into purity, enlightenment, and ascension. One can see at once the need for secrecy. Only literature associated with the Judaic source would have been acceptable to the Pharisees and the high priest in Jerusalem. All the other three sources would have been considered heretical. As the lay brothers studied quietly in the library at Qumran, they must have known they were reading banned material. If the more esoteric and controversial, and therefore more dangerous texts had not yet been found by archaeologists, this may indicate that they were better guarded or hidden with greater care. Before Qumran was finally overrun during the Jewish uprising against the Romans in 66 to 74 CE, the most precious texts might have been taken out of this area. Their absence among the scrolls so far discovered is no proof that they did not exist. And if you recall in an earlier video, I think it was actually in the last video, they talked about this. Daniel talked about this and said that they knew that they would go looking for these things. And so they purposely placed what was found so that people would think they found something. But what they found wasn't even the tip of the iceberg, but they don't know that. Nobody knows that, which I think is, they're so clever. Just reading this whole book and how they came up with everything and how long they'd been planning everything and playing it out so secretly really takes a special group of people, because it sounds like it was extremely hard to do. In any case, if the Essenes sprang from Judaic sources alone, why were the Pharisees and Sadducees so disturbed by the depth of the Essene knowledge? If the sources had been purely Judaic, these groups would also have had access to them, and they would have presented few surprises. It is far more logical to suppose that it was the extra Judaic element in Essene sources and Essene thinking that was the core of the problem. To many Jews of that period, such literature would have seemed alien, heathen, and heretical, and they would have regarded any who chose to study it as a dangerous and subversive element in Jewish society. Essenism presented the Orthodox Jews with a direct challenge. The wide-ranging wisdom of the Essenes and their grasp of universal law undermined that sense of uniqueness to which the conventional Jews clung with such tenacity. Curiously enough, it is also the question of uniqueness, the uniqueness of Jesus, which makes the Essenes seem so challenging to some Christians. The uniqueness of Jesus, in their view, is based upon his emergence as a great spiritual teacher with no major antecedents. In this view, Jesus springs miraculously from a spiritual void and single-handedly establishes the truth upon earth. The reality which emerges from the regression evidence is very different. The Essenes had a long tradition of teachers of righteousness, and Jesus fitted within this tradition. Some of the basic concepts were already in place by the time he came to take up his work, and so were many of the ceremonial customs, including baptism, drinking wine from a communal cup, and the ritual meal. Sorry, my dog always likes to bark when I'm making videos. What was unique about Jesus was the way he shifted the focus from God in the heavens to God in the heart. This radical change must have been difficult enough for the Essenes, but for the Orthodox Jews whose perception of the Father was much more rigid and specific, this shift from God around us to the God within must have seemed quite impossible. It would have felt like a betrayal of a personal relationship established by their forefathers and hollowed by time. The regression evidence has revealed a good deal of the background to Jesus' life and work from the Essene viewpoint. What is clear from this evidence is the extensive structure of support which existed around him. This is not the story of a lone teacher, but an integrated spiritual family focused on Jesus. The whole Essene movement revolved around their teacher of righteousness, and the unfolding story presents a picture of careful planning, dedicated teamwork, and wise coordination. The ground had been well prepared for Jesus, and he had the backing of a committed and dedicated team. Joseph of Arimathea also emerges as a key member of this team. The regression evidence makes it clear that Joseph was a figure of major significance within the Essene Brotherhood. Being a man of wealth and position within the greater Jewish community, Joseph was well placed to protect the Essenes' interests at time of crisis. The Essenes emerge here as much more complex than earlier accounts have suggested, and this complexity has many aspects to it, including a multifaceted philosophy and an elaborate security structure. The Essenes are often described as being tolerant, dedicated, and idealistic, and these elements of Essene life are present in the regression evidence. I had to stop and tell my dog to be quiet. But in this account, the Essenes are also practical, emotional, and humorous. These are real people with human feelings and emotions. It is this aspect more than any other which lifts them out of history and brings them to life for us. All right, and now we have part 18, which is just titled Overview. Dare to think the unthinkable. Dare to question the unquestionable. Dare to consider different concepts of life and death. And that comes from Dolores Cannon from the book Jesus and the Essenes. I have that book. It is an amazing book. All of Dolores Cannon's books are really, really interesting reads. Not that this one isn't, but this one's a good one to start with. All right, chapter 48. This is titled The Continuing Story. And then we have chapter 49, The Conclusion, and that is it. And honestly, I thought that the part we just finished reading was going to be a lot shorter, part 17, but it is a little bit longer, and I don't want to make super, super long videos. So I know that I said I was going to read the rest of this book in this video, but I'm going to leave this part on its own, and then I will read chapter 48 and 49, or otherwise known as part 18, in our next video, because we're almost at the 20-minute mark, and I think this will take us probably to like the 35-40 minute mark, and I really don't want to make any videos too terribly long. So we're going to stop right there. I'll put my bookmark in, and we will for sure finish this video or this book in my next video. So until next time, please take care of yourself. Please take care of those around you. I love you all so much, and I thank you so very much for joining me, and I will see you for the last part of this book in our next video. Take care until then. Bye-bye.